So one more chapter of 500 years of indigenous resistance. The European struggle for hegemony, Hegemony, not sure what that is. But the European struggle for hegemony. Although colonial wars have been fought in the past between France, Spain, and Netherlands and England, and conflicts have erupted between their colonies in the Americas, the late 1680s and the following 100-year period was to be a time of bitter struggle between the Europeans for domination. This period of European wars was to be played out also in the Americas. To a great extent, the battle for colonies and the wealth they produced was the ultimate battlefield for state power in Europe. Beginning in 1689 with King William's War between the French and the English, which evolved into Queen Anne's War 1702 through 1713 to King George's War 1744 through 48, and culminating in the so-called French and Indian War 1754 through 63, the battles for colonial possessions in the Americas mirrored those raging across Europe in the same period, except that in North American and in the Caribbean, the European struggle for hegemony in the emerging world trade market would employ heavy concentrations of native wars. While the British emerged victorious from the Great War for Empire, and the French defeated ceding Hudson Bay, Acadia, New France, and other territories in a series of treaties, those who were most affected by the European struggles were the native peoples of the Atlantic regions. The fallout from those wars was the virtual extermination of some indigenous peoples, including the Appalachians in Florida, the establishment of colonial military garrisons and outposts, a general militarization of the region with heavier armaments and combat veterans, and the subsequent expansion of colonial settlements, extending their frontiers and pushing many First Nations further west. During the period of the colonial wars, so there was actually these countries fighting for the land out here. During the period of colonial wars, indigenous resistance did not end, nor was it limited to aiding their respective allies. So I guess they would choose, sometimes they would probably side, they would have certain allies. So I don't know if there's allies within other indigenous groups, or they're talking about those other countries, European countries that are fighting for their own land. Did they ever become allies with maybe a nicer side, like if France was more nicer than fucking Spain? In 1711, the Tuscaroras attacked the English in North Carolina and fought for 2 years until the English counter-insurgency campaign left hundreds dead and some 400 people sold into slavery. The Tuscaroras fled north, settling among the Haudenosaunee and becoming the Sixth Nation in 1722. In 1715, the Yamasee Nation rose up against the English in South Carolina, but were virtually exterminated in a ruthless English campaign. In 1720, the Chickasaw Nation warred against French occupation, those who were just sitting there taking care of the land, you know, because they kind of, I guess they took over and now they had to sit there, so they're occupying the land until France's capitulation to England in 1763. Similarly, Fox resistance to French colonialism continued from 1920 to around 1735. I think it's a typo, 1720 to around 1730. It says 1920 in this book. Similarly, Fox resistance to French colonialism continued from 1720 to around 1735. In 1729, the Natchez Nation began attacking French settlers in Louisiana after Governor Seward Chapart ordered their main village cleared for his plantations. So there's already a fucking governor when there's still like a Natchez Nation. In the ensuing battles, Chapart was killed and the French counterinsurgency campaign left the Natchez decimated, although guerrilla struggle was to continue along the Mississippi River. In 1760, the Cherokee Nation began their own guerrilla war against their allies, the English, in Virginia and Carolina. Led by Okonostota, the Cherokee fought for 2 years, eventually agreeing to a peace treaty which saw partitions of their land ceded after the English colonial forces had razed Cherokee villages and crops. Razed, R-A-Z-E-D, maybe destroyed. In 1761, Aleutians in Alaska attacked Russian traders following depredations on Aleut communities off the coast of Alaska. The Russian colonizers eventually moved into the Pribilof and Aleutian Islands in 1796, relocating Aleutians and virtually enslaving them in the seal hunt, or making it work for them. Against British colonization, the Ottawa leader Pontiac led an alliance of Ottawas, Algonquins, Senecas, Mingos, and Wyandots in 1763. The offensive captured 9 of 12 English garrisons and laid siege to Detroit for 6 months. Unable to expand the insurgency or draw in promised French assistance, Pontiac eventually negotiated an end to the conflict in 1766. So the Ottawas fought against British colonization, and that's part of Canada, Ottawa, Canada. And so the offensive captured 9 of 12 English garrisons. So, dude, the Ottawas were doing some damage, and they even got hold of Detroit for 6 months. But then they thought they were going to get help from France, but they didn't. So, added to this period of warfare was the continuing spread of disease epidemics. In 1746, in Nova Scotia alone, 4,000 Micmacs had died of disease. With the defeat of France, the British had acquired vast regions of formerly French territory, unbeknownst to the many First Nations who lived on those lands. So that's what that story of the Patriots about, pretty much. With the defeat of France, the British had acquired vast regions of formerly French territory, unbeknownst to the many First Nations who lived on those lands, and with whom the French never negotiated any land treaties nor recognized any form of native title. But now they're realizing the British are coming through. So the French were kind of nice in a sense. They were trying to maybe do it in a nice way, but British didn't give a fuck. At this time, in quotes, the British government seized the opportunity to consolidate its imperial position by structuring formal constitutional relations with natives. In the Proclamation of 1763, it announced its intention of conciliating those disgruntled tribes by recognizing their land rights, by securing to them control of unceded land, and by entering into a nation-to-nation relationship. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 provided for a separate Indian territory west of the Appalachians and the original 13 colonies. Within this territory, there was to be no purchasing of land other than by the Crown, and the colonies now under British control, including Newfoundland, Labrador, Quebec, Nova Scotia, as well as the 13 colonies, settlers occupying unceded native lands were to be removed, and private purchases of lands occupied by or reserved for natives was prohibited. These lands could only be purchased by the Crown in the presence of the First Nations. As grand as these statements were, they were routinely violated by colonialists and rarely enforced. Indeed, 1 year following the proclamation, Lord Dunmore, the governor of the Virginia colony, had already breached the demarcation line by granting to veterans of the French and Indian War who had served under him lands which were part of the Shawnee Nation. The Shawnee retaliation was not short in coming, but Dunmore's challenge to British control was to precipitate in form and substance another period of conflict that would see the colonization process expand westward. And that period of conflict would underline the real intent of the Royal Proclamation as a strategic document in the defense of British colonial interests in North America. So it was a fake letter. Like, they were just, it was never legit. It was like, okay, they just wanted them kind of away from them, you know? So it says that underlined that period of conflict would underline the real intent of the Royal Proclamation, like that fucking letter, like as a strategic document in the defense of British colonial interests in North America. So it was to show other people that they were, I guess, gonna treat the natives as if they were smart, but then smart in that business sense, you know. But I don't know, like they said in the beginning of this book, a lot of the indigenous people, they never fucking made contracts or had to, like, it was never, you know, certain shit. They were just totally living off the land, you know, not feeling entitled to shit, or like, you know, I mean, I'm sure there was some people who were desperate and needed shit, especially as populations grow. I don't know, just kind of in human nature to take advantage of someone who's weaker than you, or take advantage of an opportunity, but on the other side of the opportunity might be something or someone that's vulnerable, you know? I mean, that's what businessmen do. They kind of, they're gonna go into a business where the return is actually more of a possibility as opposed. I mean, who's gonna fucking want to waste money, you know? Peace, y'all.